Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of Thrive, your source for expert advice and insights into mental health and well-being. On today's episode, we are going to be looking at men's mental health, seeing as we've got Movember and International Men's Health Day. And these are designed to raise awareness around mental health holistically, but being a mental health and well-being company, we want to look at the mind and the psychological health. So today we've got a great guest. His name's James Sclater. He is our National Learning Solutions Manager and a registered psychologist, and he's going to be taking us through everything. Hi James, how you going?
Good, thanks Curtis. Thanks for having me along today.
Yeah, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Sure, I think you covered off a couple of points there. So in terms of my background, I'm a registered psychologist, have been for the best part of the last decade. Most of my studies were in organisational psychology, and I've been working mostly in the mental health and consulting areas for just over 10 years now.
Yeah, brilliant. So I guess first question, this month there are a couple of awareness days, as we've previously mentioned, that are targeting men's health. And in recognition, do you think there's a significant issue when it comes to men's mental health?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when we think about men's health and men's mental health specifically, some of the challenges might lie in some of the unknowns. So what I mean by that is what we know is one of the real challenges with men's mental health is that a lot of men don't tend to seek help. So that can make it really difficult for us to actually understand the prevalence rates of certain conditions, because it is somewhat contingent on people going to seek help, getting diagnosed, and for that to be then reported in the data. So it is one of the real challenges there. I know that when we talk about things like suicide rates, for example, significantly higher rates coming through for men in particular. When we look at some of the statistics, as I said, sometimes it's really hard to know how accurate we are, because it is somewhat challenging with the reporting issue and the help-seeking behaviours of males compared to females.
Yeah, why is that then? Why is it difficult?
I think certainly in terms of men not seeking help, a lot of that might come down to, I suppose, historically, stereotypical sort of masculinity, or you've probably heard of things like toxic masculinity before. Yeah. So things like males being seen as needing to be strong, and primary breadwinner has been sort of those traditional roles has maybe meant that men don't feel comfortable seeking help and they need to hold things together there, so to speak. I certainly think there's been a shift more recently, and look, I don't necessarily know that I have data to pull that from or anything to sort of draw from there to give any sort of concrete figures or anything like that, but I'd say that traditionally that's probably where the challenge has existed, and potentially it has been a knowledge and awareness issue as well, with some males maybe not knowing that they are experiencing symptoms of a mental health concern, for example. But again, I think there has been some improvements there, and certainly from my experience working within organisations, I'm certainly understanding and seeing that the literacy around mental health, certainly from a workplace perspective, has improved, and and I've certainly seen a lot of participation from both from males within the programs that we've run.
Yeah, definitely. And I know you've previously mentioned their suicide rates, which are of considerable concern, because I've got a bit of stats here from an AIHW study from 2023, which stated 43% of Australian males have experienced a mental health problem in their lifetime. Why do you think it's such a large population of men experience mental health issues, and what are these main drivers that you've seen or know about?
Yeah, certainly. Look, in terms of the risk factors for males that I've sort of read about and seen, a lot of it can come down to things like physical health, so physical health conditions, injuries, those sorts of things. Certainly things in terms of substance use as well, so alcohol and drug use, for example, there. Financial pressures, these are probably some fairly typical risk factors that we see in men that would probably give rise to some of those figures there. The statistics are quite interesting, because even if we look at Australian general population, those numbers are fairly consistent between genders. So across the lifespan of Australian adults, we sort of see around 40 to 45% experiencing mental health conditions.
Is that both female and male?
Female and male, yeah, correct. So they are somewhat within that. I think a lot of those, as I said, those statistics are quite challenging, though, because we don't know exactly where those true data does lie. It is somewhat contingent on sort of the self-report measures as well as people seeking help. But particularly when we think about men, I suppose, a lot of the times it can come down to some of those risk factors that I just mentioned there.
Yeah, definitely. So this month it's November, which calls upon the public to grow a moustache to raise awareness for men's health. And one of the themes that Movember identifies is male suicide. And obviously we've talked a little bit about this previously. And Life of Mine states that for every 3,000 suicides per year, 75% are disproportionately male. So on all fronts, and I guess regardless of gender as well, because it's topical in every way, shape and form. So What can we do to reduce and effectively eliminate suicide in our communities?
Yeah, look, I think one of the biggest things that we can do is obviously look out for the males in our lives, and being aware of what some of those signs are that men's mental health may be compromised. So we've certainly seen that males do tend to, I suppose, demonstrate different maybe behaviours or signs and symptoms. So some of the things that I would touch on there is that males are more likely to complain of physical symptoms than they are of mental health symptoms, for example. So it might be sort of aches and pains that they might be discussing, as opposed to I've been feeling sort of really flat or quite down or low mood and those sorts of things. In terms of the emotions they would typically display, so again, we'd probably go back to that stereotypical masculinity. So males more likely to demonstrate sort of anger, frustration, maybe sort of yelling and that sort of stuff would come through irritability, as opposed to maybe panic, sadness, fear, those sorts of things. In terms of behaviours, males more likely to self-medicate. So we'd probably see a little bit more in terms of alcohol use, increased drug use as well, in terms of that self-medication piece. It does still come back to this idea that there's usually a bit of a change. So if it is a change in behaviour, change in physical appearance, change in the emotions, or the way that someone's sort of speaking and thoughts expressed, those sorts of things. But it's important to, as I said, be aware of what are some of those typical male signs, because, as I said, they can be somewhat different to maybe what we see in female counterparts.
Yeah, and because in one of our previous episodes I did with our amazing Chief Clinical Officer, Kate Page, she talked about, people would go quite introverted or, vice versa, they might go extremely extroverted, and they're sort of signs that you can sort of see. Is that like quite true for obviously the male population, if they're going through, say, battles with their mental health, can they just completely withdraw? Or on the flip side, you might notice someone being extremely,
yeah,
extroverted.
Yeah, look, it can certainly go both ways. I think often when we talk about this within our programs, we talk about this sort of baseline technique where people can either be more extreme or more toned down. So the example you gave there around sort of social withdrawal, that'd be an example of being toned down. So away from your baseline, I'm socially withdrawing, I'm being quieter, I'm not maybe engaging with my support network or with my team at work as much. So that'd be that example of sort of toning down. The more extreme, that would be things like, okay, well now it's maybe I'm very irritable, very emotionally reactive. I'm maybe yelling or getting easily frustrated more than usual. So it can be more extreme. Like you said, people can, I suppose, be more sociable. And again, it might be people engage or males engage more in conversation, but it could be a little bit more panic and frustration or general sort of negativity that's coming through there. We typically probably see from the social side, it is the withdrawal piece though. And sometimes people would think, if I don't maybe speak as much or connect with my network as much, people aren't going to notice there's a problem. So if we are trying to maybe hide those signs and symptoms, that social withdrawal piece is probably one of the common things that we may engage in to do so. In and of itself, it becomes a sign, but that person just thinks, if I just don't maybe speak to people as much or connect with my support network, then they're not going to notice that there's an issue or a problem.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose this is where I sort of segue towards stigmatization, prejudice, things like that, where that might stop men from being able to seek help. What can men do in that space then? I guess sort of champion each other, and also what can we do as a society to sort of put down those walls and break down those those stigmas?
Yeah, I certainly think there's been a bit of movement on that front already. So we've seen the, I suppose, resurgence of things like Men's Line and Men's Shed, for example. So some community mental health support groups that are specifically targeting men's mental health issues and trying to create, I suppose, safe ways for men to open up and to speak about their mental health concerns and to seek help. So I think sometimes being aware that those avenues are there and sometimes encouraging connection with those. As I said before, it's probably, whether it's a stereotype or not, men liking to sort of fix and solve things and take control. So I think sometimes it's useful for encouraging males to self-educate as well. So for example, Beyond Blue's got a range of great sort of mental health resources on their website. So I've in the past encouraged friends of mine to have a bit of a read for themselves, just to, if they think that something might be up or they could learn a little bit more about something they're going through. That can be a good way to sort of self-educate, and that might then lead into someone taking some action from there. So we can sort of start small like that, I would say. I certainly think that not steering away from having the conversation as much as it can be uncomfortable, of course, when it comes to having supportive mental health conversations. There has been some research that's looked at when we are speaking to men about mental health that it can be good to actually do that whilst doing something.
Okay.
So
I suppose that's where men's shake are coming quite nicely.
Spot on. It's a great example of it. It's like, let's get together and let's do something constructive, and that sort of might then break down some of those walls and get people to talk about things. But, I suppose for us, when we're looking out for our mates and the males in our lives, it can be useful to, have these sorts of conversations whilst doing something. So rather than me coming in and going, Curtis, I'm really concerned about you, and bring you into a room and it might feel a little bit like an intervention or something, it might be that, we go for a bit of a walk together, or we go for a drive together, or we're running or fishing or something like that, where naturally these are things that we might do, and it allows us to sort of have a safe conversation there. And some of the thinking behind that is that it can be actually more useful to engage in what we call sideways listening.
Okay.
So rather than me sitting opposite you and again having that sort of conversation, it allows us to kind of speak about something that might be of a concern in a way that's probably less conducive to eye contact, which might go against, I suppose, some of our traditional thoughts around respectful communication. But in essence, it still shows that we're able to listen, but that person that's maybe on the receiving end of that conversation might not feel as maybe confronted by it. So a less threatening way to go about it.
So what would that look like in practice then, I guess?
Well, certainly when we've talked to organisations about this, and I've run training programs where this topic has come up, I've asked them for examples. What does this actually look like at your workplace? So there's been work that I've done with sort of construction and mining organisations that often talk about, the car is the best place to have that conversation. We might be driving to pick up a piece of equipment, or we're driving from one site to the next. I've got to have eyes on the road as I'm driving, and it's just a natural way to sort of have that conversation from there. Some people just talk about sort of the walk and talk, or go grab a coffee, or might actually be doing an actual work task together that enables that. On a less of a work front, I certainly know that from my experience, I don't mind doing a bit of running. So if I have concerns for a friend of mine and we might sort of run together, that's a good opportunity to do that. Or it could be that we go to the gym or do something like that. It doesn't have to be physical activity, but usually whilst we are sort of doing something that enables that sideways listening, can be really, really helpful way to go about it.
So I suppose it sort of reduces the pressure, I guess. I think that's one of probably the biggest things is the pressure.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the things to think about as well is not that, every conversation that we have needs to lead to an outcome. So, I could open up a conversation with a mate of mine that I'm concerned for, and he might feel a little bit confronted or a little bit taken aback or wasn't expecting it, and might not sort of disclose that there's anything going on, or might not, go into too much. And that's okay. We don't need a forced disclosure. We need people to, run and seek help immediately. It can be a little bit of a case of, maybe that wasn't the right time or the right place, but you might come back to that conversation at another point in time. So I often say that it can be a bit of a series of conversations as well, and it doesn't need to necessarily lead to an outcome immediately.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose anecdotally, I was like, with my own self, I've, battled those mental battles, and then having that whole mentality where it was like, so unhealthy, but, it's one of them ones, being a bloke myself, finding it quite difficult to shift that whole, keep calm, carry on, boys don't cry, you're a man, get over it, that kind of thing. And it's like, it's so wrong on so many levels. And they're the sort of stigmas, obviously, that people are being able to see, but being able to actually go out and have a conversation and being able to actually, offload or, shed off this skin that's, very difficult to sort of combat, especially when you are dealing with stigmas and poor mental health. One of the things that I found worked really well was like mindfulness breathing exercises and things like that, because I'm not really a meditation kind of guy. Like that's not my thing. But I suppose, what are some like nice, easy techniques that people can, deploy when, they might be feeling a panic attack, minor panic attack coming on, or they might be feeling a little bit anxious about, having to deal with this conversation with someone. What's some nice little tips and tricks that people can use in their everyday life?
Sure. And look, I think you certainly touched on some there around sort of mindfulness and breathing techniques. One of the ones that I've found really useful and put into practice for myself is what they call a grounding technique. So this is mostly what we call sort of a self-regulation thing to try and sort of, maybe it's calm some of the symptoms of anxiety or stress or pressure that we might be facing. But a grounding exercise is engaging with your senses. The 5-4-3-2-1 technique is in particular. So
I've done that one before.
You've done it before?
Yeah, it's a good one, yeah.
Yeah, and I found it quite useful. So it's kind of like, I'm probably going to get this wrong, but 5 things you can see, maybe 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, and so on. I'm a bit of a simple person though, so I really simplified it for myself. So when I practice that technique, what I like to do is just switch on the ears. So I actually like just to go outside, sometimes shut my eyes and just purely listen and really just taking note of what are the things that I'm hearing and doing nothing else. So that's just one simple technique I've found in terms of trying to sort of calm things down a little bit and to manage sort of those symptoms of stress and anxiety. I think there is a lot of the fundamentals, sleep, diet, and exercise that we're all probably aware of, but whether we always engage in those things or whether we do it, when we need to. But I'd say probably one of the more important things, if we think about for us, from a self-care side of things, is engaging in healthy habits and maybe call it a lifestyle if you want, but just things that we do consistently and regularly that we find has a good bearing on our mental health. Because if we think about it, we talked about some of the risk factors earlier on to men's mental health. When we've got a few risk factors going on within our lives, and things like right now it could be cost of living pressures, so financial strain as just one of those examples.
So things like overworking and stuff like that, like
absolutely
really putting yourself into work and burning yourself out essentially.
Absolutely, and certainly that's been an area of much more focus now with psychosocial safety and risk within the workplace. But those are certainly risk factors for mental health. So when we think about those, there's a range of risks we have in our lives. We want to try and certainly buffer those with protective factors within our lives. So often I talk about sort of self-care with people, it's around, it shouldn't be just we just do these things when we need to do them. It's how much can we just make this part of our everyday lifestyle, healthy habits, if you want to call it that. So what are your go-to things? Is it the physical exercise? Is it the relaxation? Is it the mindfulness? Is it social connection? Or is it a combination of all these things? But it's stuff that you do regularly, not just stuff that I do when I sort of feel I need to.
Yeah, I suppose it's a bit of a treatment, isn't it? Like, being able to have that connection. So whenever I start feeling a bit down, it's like talk to a friend, have a bit of a moment. If I'm going to a coffee shop or a pub or something like that, just to try and get a bit of a social connection. And then sort of, talk through things a little bit, I suppose, is a great way as well. Because, again, the pressure. And I know some people might not be, massively into meditation like myself, but maybe having a chat can be, one of the biggest things, definitely.
Yeah. And I think, look, a lot of those times, there's different things that work for different people, and there's probably different things at different times that work for people as well. But it's exploring what they could be. Like you said, it could be going to the pub and socialising. There's a lot of times when a lot of us probably feel we've got this bit of a social event coming up and it's almost like, oh, I can't be bothered, I don't want to go.
Yeah. And social anxiety as well can be a massive thing too, yeah.
For sure. But sometimes we probably find that a lot of times when we go to those social events, gatherings, we go, oh, actually it was pretty good once we got there, but you sort of felt that like, oh, I couldn't be bothered beforehand or whatever else. But the same thing's probably true of a lot of the things we're talking about here. I can't be bothered going for a run today, or I don't really want to go down to the pub and see my mate. I just want to sort of stay in and relax. But a lot of times when we actually go and do those things, we kind of find the value and the worth of them, even though we might not have felt it in the lead up.
Definitely. So I suppose my final question then, and thank you so much, James, honestly, everything's been so fantastic. What can we do as a society to help break down these stigmas? And as men, what can we do to redefine seeking help and show that it's okay to get support?
Yeah, look, I suppose it's probably not sort of a huge sort of range of surprises here or anything like that. There's been a lot of talk about, people being vulnerable and showing vulnerability. I think there's been a lot of work in destigmatization through, I suppose, individuals that have had lived experience, that have gotten out there, that might be sort of those mental health champions that will go and give presentations, share their story. I think that does go a long way, absolutely. So, when we talk about sharing our personal experiences, certainly that shows a level of vulnerability. It can help normalize things for people as well. It can make people feel a little bit more safer to maybe speak up and talk about problems and challenges, or know that they're not alone or that they're isolated. So I've certainly seen a lot of value in that. And we talked about men's shed a little bit earlier, and that's probably one of those examples there again where often it is people that have had that lived experience that are out there in those community groups that are doing some of that work around destigmatization. So when we're having those conversations with males in our lives as well, we might share some of those experiences like you have today as well, to help people to feel a little bit more sort of comfortable or have that sort of level of psychological safety to speak up or disclose, or can be that thing that prompts them into action, where we might sort of share a bit of a story about a challenge we had and what we did about it, and then that maybe does inspire someone, makes them feel sort of comfortable to take that next step for themselves. It always is a little bit of a balancing act. We don't want to sort of make it all about ourselves and let me just tell you all my history and go into sort of childhood and everything like that. But certainly, there can be a real place for that and real value in doing that in terms of the destigmatization piece. But it's probably a couple of those things that we've mentioned: being aware of what the signs are, being aware of ways in which we can go about having those conversations, and some of the things that can certainly help in those situations.
Because it is just archaic, isn't it? Like those old-fashioned beliefs are just has no room in society. But yeah, thank you so much, James. It was a great episode, and thank you all for listening and for watching. We know that some of the themes that we've covered off today can be highly triggering for some people, so if you need support, please call Lifeline on 13 11 14. Alternatively, access your at-work EAP system. So if Converge is your EAP, we're here for you anytime, anywhere, 24/7. So all you have to do is reach out to your HR department and see. And and then access the great services that are available too. So again, thank you so much, James, and I'll see you again soon for episode 5 of Thrive.